Some 300 years ago, philosophers in Europe instigated a program for universal human improvement founded upon the faculty of reason. Uniquely empowered by this faculty, they thought, humans had the potential to liberate themselves from the constraints that bind all other creatures to an earthly existence and to reach for the heights of civilization. They could become the masters of nature. Over the ensuing centuries, this humanist philosophy, heralding an age of enlightenment, would underwrite developments in education, health, literacy, governance, science, and technology, which, as they gathered pace, would spread around the globe with trade and colonization, and go on to transform the lives of millions. That Enlightenment humanism has contributed immensely to the common good is undeniable. Yet it has come at a cost in two respects. First, in driving a wedge between humanity and nature, the very planet which had once nourished and supported life in all its forms came to be seen as a repository of resources to be plundered, unloosing an unfettered extraction of materials on an industrial scale, which has ravaged the earth and jeopardized its capacity for renewal. Second, while the appeal to universal human entitlement serves the interests of those empowered to lay claim to it, for others, the forcible imposition of this claim has brought only oppression and impoverishment. As these twin costs have inexorably risen, what began as an agenda for the emancipation of peoples from around the world has morphed into a vicious spiral of environmental destruction and social injustice. 300 years of progress, it seems, far from delivering humanity to a promised land of peace and plenty, leave us looking into an abyss. So where then did it go wrong? How come that the road to civilization has led instead to social breakdown and planetary ruin? Perhaps the tragic outcome was already inevitable from the moment when our illustrious predecessors, albeit for the best of intentions, decreed that the proper vocation for humankind lay not in following in the footsteps of ancestors, aligning the ways along which human lives are led with the ways of the manifold beings of other kinds with which they used to coexist, but in turning their backs on these creaturely ways to progress resolutely in the opposite direction. For other creatures, as a rule, don't do progress. Generation follows generation along the trails, burrows, and flightways of its predecessors. The direction of travel is always towards where ancestors have been before. That is why every way of life is also a way of remembering. Yet, even as they go forth in life, creatures lean over those that follow behind in a gesture of care and attention, even of love. Each generation, as we say colloquially, looks after the next. Indeed, for most creatures, their life's work consists in creating the conditions for their offspring to flourish, sometimes in the most unpromising of environments. And in this work, they often display much ingenuity, improvising makeshift arrangements that help them muddle along, always in the midst of things. Human beings, for most of their time on this earth, have done much the same. They too have muddled along, following where other creatures go, as the hunter, for example, follows the trail, or the gatherer, the rhizome, keeping their ancestors before and their descendants aft. We call their ways of life traditions, a word derived from the Latin verb tradere, meaning to hand over or to pass on, as in a relay race where one runner passes the baton to the next. So every coming generation likewise imparts new momentum to the life process, even as the energy of forebears begins to wane. But unlike the race, tradition is driven by an imperative not to cross the finishing line, but to keep on going. But with the onset of what we now know as the modern era, every new generation, far from carrying on along ancestral ways, would come to denounce these ways as backward and regressive. Thenceforth, to progress in life meant crossing the line, to take possession of the present. And from its platform in the present, each generation would then project a vision for the future, destined not to rejuvenate the past, but to replace it. Its mission was to turn this vision into reality. And for modern generations, with their targets set upon the future, the past would lie not ahead, but behind. It was over, finished. In the humanist myth of origin, this turn on the past is retrojected onto the entirety of human history. According to the myth, it marked that mighty moment when true humanity broke off from its primordial roots in the animal kingdom and, guided by the light of reason, embarked on its long ascent. This revolution, moreover, is supposedly recapitulated in the life of every child as they mature from an original, purely biological condition of infancy to become a fully fledged socio-cultural being, endowed with an assertive sense of self and the power to change the world. In the idiom of modernity, this turnaround nails a claim to essential humanity, as much as in the lifetime of the individual, as in the evolution of the species as a whole. The very idea of modernity, the very idea of humanity, indeed, appears charged with what contemporary critics call exceptionalism. I shall return to this charge, not to reject it, but rather to lay it on its side, investing it with a power not of superiority, but of love. For while the idea of humanity may be modern, the word human is not. But this is equally true of the word for the world from which in the modern mind it all began, namely nature. In its pre-modern inflections, this word dates back to the year, I'm not sure how to, oh yes, that's right, dates back to the year 50 BC. In its pre-modern inflections, this word dates back at least to around the year 50 BCE, when the Roman author Titus Lucretius Carus composed his prose poem De Rerum Natura, of the nature of things. And here he addresses nature in the feminine, as the creatress or creatrix of all there is. Etymologically, her name comes from the Latin nascere, to be born, and connotes a power at large in the cosmos to give birth to new life. Could it be, then, that the champions of modernity, in turning their backs on nature and usurping all powers of creation for their human selves, have repudiated its very natality, its power to give birth, which Lucretius placed at the heart of his deliberations? What if we were to turn around once again to resume a posture in which the temporal direction of our lives is concordant with that of the nature of which we are ourselves begotten, such that we humans could carry on in the company of creatures of other kinds, and they with us, as we grow older together? This would be to join with nature in the very unfolding of the life around us. It would be to enter into the indivisible process of life's ongoingness, or with what the Dutch philosopher Baruch Spinoza, writing in the 17th century, called natura naturans, nature's naturing. In this active principle of, I don't know how to move this on. Oh, well, I want to move to the next slide, but I don't know how to do it. Ah, no, that's in the wrong order. They've lost. Ah, there. Sorry. This is what Baruch Spinoza, writing in the 17th century, called natura naturans, nature's naturing. And in this active principle of creation, Spinoza saw the clearest proof of the existence of God. It was the rearward gaze of modernity, looking back over the ways it had come, that reconfigured nature as already natured, natura naturata, visible in the passive fallout deposited by the wayside. And with this, nature was turned into an object for secular science. By undoing this reversal, might we restore the original unison of religious and scientific sensibilities that the Enlightenment did so much to split asunder? Could we, after Spinoza, repurpose the concept of nature for a new humanism? Imagine a car accelerating down the fast lane of a highway. The metalled road on which nothing grows slices through a world threaded by a mesh of trails, routes, and runners. Along these threads of life, since time immemorial, creatures of all sorts, including humans, have gone about their business. But the driver, strapped to his seat, sees only their reflections caught in the rear view mirrors on either side of his vehicle. He glimpses species of nature on one side, and on the other, human traditions, both on the point of vanishing into the distance. Suppose that we exchange the perspective from the driving seat for that of the inhabitants left by the roadside as he hurtles by. All at once, the fugitive reflections of nature and tradition come back to life in a world that revolves around the comings and goings of the inhabitants themselves. It is they who hold the center now, while our driver shoots off into the void. Only from this center, in the midst of things, can they discharge their responsibility of care towards the manifold forms of life around them. And with this, we arrive at a concept of culture, commonly paired with that of nature, but as its complementary opposite. Though anthropologists of my generation have been keen to dismiss the nature-culture binary as a product of the Western mindset, by which they mean the humanism of the European Enlightenment, the truth is that the concept of culture is no more an invention of the modern era than the concept of nature. Like the concept of nature, it has been around for more than 2,000 years. What was new to modernity was the specific inflection given to these terms by way of their opposition to human reason and its interests. In fact, the word culture comes from the Latin verb collere, meaning to cultivate, as in tilling the soil, or in more general terms, taking care of or looking after. So if nature is the power to give birth to new life, then culture refers to the human task to nurture this life in order that it may grow and flourish for generations to come. And with this, nature and culture follow one another, just as in the cycle of life, the labors of birth give way to the work of nourishment. But the modern imagination, having stripped nature of the power of natality, from which it had taken its name, would go on to strip culture of its original connotations of nourishment. As nature's naturing became nature natured, so culture's culturing became culture cultured. Reflected thus in the rear view mirror of advancing reason, both nature and culture reappear as a catalogue of final forms to be conserved for posterity. There is the catalogue of species, known as biodiversity, and the catalogue of cultures, known as ethnic diversity. But once restored to their original meanings of continuous birth and nurturance, the concepts of nature and culture can guide us towards an alternative settlement that would undo the very turn that first set humanity on the high road to civilization. Herein, I believe, lies the possibility of a new humanism committed not to progress, but to the continuity of life, that is, to sustainability in the proper sense of the term. Just as the path to the future in this new humanism lies in retracing old ways, so it is through the recovery of their old meanings that the concepts of nature and culture indicate a way forward. But this is no less true of the concept of the human. I've already observed that this concept has an ancient history which long predates the invention of humanity at the birth of the modern era. And it's perhaps by retrieving an older current of thought that we can find a source of renewal for times to come. I'm thinking of the 13th century Catalan philosopher and mystic Ramon Llull. In Llull's cosmology, as expounded in his final work, Logica Nova, dating from 1301, everything is a doing, a happening. Fire, for example, is not a thing that burns, it is burning. Likewise, wind is blowing, and so on. To name anything, any phenomenon, we have to begin with the verb. How then are we to name the human? To solve the problem, Llull devised a new word, a new verb, previously unheard of in Latin, the language of Logica Nova. And that word was homificare, literally to humanify. The human, Llull declared, is a humanifying animal. Homo est animal homificans. And for humans to humanify, according to Llull, is to forge their own and others' existence within the crucible of a common life. So their humanness is not given from the start, nor is it ever finally achieved. It lies rather in the ceaseless work of co-creation. Indeed, following Llull, we should not really regard humans as beings at all. They are rather becomings. And as such, they are ever unfinished, even as life carries on. And for what they are at any moment in the life process, they bear a collective responsibility. So to nature's naturing in bringing forth new life, and culture's culturing in its nourishment and care, we can now add the tasks of humans humanifying, intrinsic to productive coexistence. But in what do these tasks consist? What makes them any different from the ways in which creatures of any other kind prosecute their lives? Many contemporary critics, keen to topple human beings from the throne of reason on which they had been crowned by the Enlightenment, would respond that they are just another species, whose capabilities, though remarkable in their way, are no more so than those of any other. It is an illusion, these critics say, to suppose that humans are exceptional. I disagree, however. The illusion, in my view, lies in the supposition that exceptionality implies superiority. I believe that the human calling is indeed exceptional, but not because humans are in some sense above beings of any other kind. Their disposition is characterized by something entirely different. We could call it a love for the world, amor mundi. This is a recurrent theme in the writings of political philosopher Hannah Arendt, for whom it implied neither a will to dominate and control nor passive acquiescence. Nor is it in the least sentimental. Rather, it entails a responsibility of care towards the world as it is, which is both firm and unconditional. It is a love born from a reverence for the creative power of nature its natality, and enacted in the work of culture, in nurturing the new life it brings forth. And for Arendt, it embodies the very essence of the human condition. Thanks to this love, humans carry a special burden of responsibility to sustain the balance of nature and ensure its ongoing fecundity. It is a burden, however, that can be discharged only from a position at the beating heart of the world itself. So whereas Enlightenment thinkers sought to decenter humanity, to place it at the apex of a pyramid with the rest of the world at its feet, the new humanism I propose here would aspire to the precise opposite, to recenter the human, to situate it in the midst of things from which emplaced center, human beings can foster relations with the earth and its manifold inhabitants on a foundation of care. This is not to build back better, but to cultivate the good. And it is why, for the sake of generations to come, we should not reject anthropocentrism, but embrace it. Thank you very much.